I felt the presence of a very large spiritual being to my left, much taller, and slightly behind me. So I turned my head to the left and I looked up, and now I'm still floating in this black. My most recent book is about my NDE, which stands for near death experience, but I actually prefer to call it my temporary death experience. My experience started when my beloved husband ended his life in 2016, and for about 2.5 years, I was out of my mind. I suffered greatly. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to do it. I was very miserable. And every night I asked God in prayers for three things. I asked God either heal me or let me go because I was in so much pain I couldn't function. And secondly, I asked God that when I died, I asked to be spared the life review. So for 29 months after my husband's death, I was in pretty bad shape. I was so full of guilt. The last conversation I had with my husband before he ended his life was a very unpleasant one, a very bad argument. And there was no chance to take that back, no chance for a do-over. And I was so full of guilt and sadness and regret and remorse. So at about 2.5 years out, I was diagnosed with cancer, and it was stage 2, so it already spread a little bit. And during a routine surgery affiliated with this diagnosis, the doctor made a boo-boo and I started to bleed. And when I woke up from the surgery, I told the nurse that I was bleeding an awful lot. And she said, well, once you get home, you'll feel better. And at home, uh, I realized I was bleeding to death. So I summoned an ambulance and I was taken by ambulance to a nearby emergency room in a hospital, another hospital, and they made some more mistakes. And one of the things that happened was the nurse who was attending me at this emergency room. So I grabbed this nurse's hand and I asked her, I said, promise me you're not going to let me die. And she said, oh, honey, we have many solutions for this. We're not going to let you die. Well, she and the doctor stepped out of the room and left me alone in this ER room, a small room, with my friend. Well, my friend said about this time that I opened my eyes. I had been unconscious, but I opened my eyes and he said, you reached up to heaven and even wiggled your fingers like a child reaching for a heavenly parent. And he said, and after that, your hands fell back to your side. And he said, you relaxed back on the gurney. And then the blood pressure cuff said error, which meant it was lower than 32/25. Meanwhile, I was having a great time. I very distinctly remember being awakened from a deep dreamless state and being catapulted out of my body. And I mean catapulted. It was very dramatic. And I knew instantly what was happening because, man, I was shot out of that body like toast out of a toaster. And I remember one of my very first thoughts was, I'm actually, my first thought was, my heart is stopped. And I thought, how do I know that? And I thought, I don't know how I know that, but I know that that's right. And my next thought was, I'm dying. And then I thought, actually, you're not dying, you're dead. And I thought, anxiety, remorse, guilt, regret, sadness, worries, all the negative stuff is what I had left behind on that gurney. And what had gone with me was everything lovely and good and positive and beautiful without any fear or worry or woe or anxiety. And I thought, this is great. I know who I really am now. I was very, very happy. People use the word joy a lot, but I was just so happy. I don't remember having been that happy since I was a child. And I felt so much peace. And I just felt so much peace. I felt I was in this blackness. I did not see my body, but I knew I was floating further and further away. But it was this very comforting blackness that just ensconced me and felt so good. It felt delicious. It was like the blackness was velvety and actively comforting me. It was wonderful. And I just felt so happy. And one of the thoughts I had, I remember thinking that all the stuff behind me was over. The sadness over my husband's death, the worry about dealing with chemotherapy and radiation, all of it was over. I didn't have to worry about any of that stuff anymore. And one of the things that happened very early on in this experience was I felt the presence of a very large spiritual being to my left, much taller, and slightly behind me. So I turned my head to the left and I looked up, and now I'm still floating in this blackness. I can't see anything. But I looked up and I said, trying to look through blackness, I guess, but I said, "And who are you?" And before I could even get the words out, the answer was immediate. The answer was, "You, Rosemary, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original," which is from Genesis 1:26 and 27. And I thought, how cool is that? I'd studied that Bible verse for so many years, but I didn't understand what it meant, that we're made in the image and likeness of God. And now I understood. There's an original. If there's an image and likeness, there's got to be an original. And it was so wonderful. It was so glorious. So, I don't know, just all so good. And this experience went on and on and on for some time. And at some point, I was in a white room. I was no longer floating away in this blackness. I was now standing on something approximating 2 feet and 2 legs in this white room. And the white room was such a pure and perfect white. But it was foggy. It was like a vapor in the room. But the droplets were not just falling, they were swirling around me almost in a perfect dance. And I remember looking at the droplets that are just swirling and dancing around me and thinking, I feel like I ought to be able to focus on one of these droplets. The next time you're in a fog, think about focusing on an individual droplet. Seems kind of crazy. But the spiritual being that accompanied me said, uh, your eyes have not become acclimated to this new environment yet, but what you're seeing are particles of light. And before you can go on to heaven or the next experience, you have to be cleansed of the muck of earth. And it made so much sense to me. And these words were not used, but it was likened to a spiritual car wash. As my friend said, leave your muddy boots at the door, which I thought was so cool. So I went through this experience in this white room and I saw this door in front of me. And I knew what that door meant. Having read and studied these NDEs for so long, I knew that door meant that that's where I would be reunited with loved ones, and that's where this journey would be over. And I was so grateful. I had prayed so hard that God would either heal me or let me go. I had just prayed so hard for that, and I felt like I had been given a release. In fact, I joked about it. It felt like I'd been granted an early release for good behavior. Here I was, age 59, and I was out of there. I was gone. This earthly experience was done. And one of the things that happened was when I first awakened to this new experience, when I realized I was floating further and further away from my body, it was like the 59 years on Earth had been just a really intense dream, and now it was over. And that was so powerful to just feel like you're waking up from a dream. Which really is what it felt like. So I see this door in front of me in this white room, and I start walking toward it and very eager to get to that door and see what's next, really excited about that. And as I'm doing this, the spiritual being is accompanying me as I walk toward the door. And she said something close to, if you decide to go back, you'll be restored to wholeness. And I thought, good to know. I'm not going back. And I got to that door and I put my right hand up to push through the door. Pretty interested to notice right-handed on earth and right-handed in heaven. But I put my right hand up to push through that door so I could move through the door. And I paused and I asked, is this the divine will for my life? The simple medical mistake takes me out. And now at 59 years, I'm dead. I'm gone. And I didn't even get past, is this divine? And the answer was immediate. It was no. This is not the divine will for your life. But, I was told, whatever you decide, you go with all of God's grace and mercy and blessings and care and love. And I thought, I'll take that deal. And I started to go through it. I was ready. I again moved toward going toward the door, through the door. And I had this vision of that nurse who had been so kind to me, who had talked to me and said, "Oh, honey, we're not going to let you die." And in this vision, and boy, was it was more than a vision. It was like I was in a room with her as a silent, invisible observer. And I saw her sitting in a hospital supply room, sitting on a little metal stool, surrounded by hospital supplies and linens and such. And she was leaning forward, head in her hands, and sobbing. And she said, through tears, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die. And I lost her. And I was like, oh, come on. And I thought, you know what? She's a nurse. She's about my age. She knows how it feels to lose someone. She's going to be okay. And then I realized I needed to go. I wanted to be done with this earth experience so badly. My life had just been so frustratingly difficult. But then I thought, okay, she can get through this, but I have to go. I'm going through the door. But then I didn't just see that nurse. I felt her grief and regret and sadness at having lost a patient, really breaking a promise to me. I mean, she had promised me, we're not going to let you die. And I recognized that deep grief as some of the pain I had experienced after my husband's death. And I thought to myself, if I can spare one person that much pain, I need to go back. And boy, in a millisecond, I was back on that gurney. I was back in my body. And it took some time. There were a lot of tests and a lot of medical tests to be done and procedures and such. But it was ultimately affirmed that every trace of the cancer was gone. The cancer was just gone. In fact, when what the doctor said, there was a second surgery to prove it. But what the doctor said after the second surgery is, she said, your flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect. I wouldn't believe you ever had cancer had I not seen the test and the rest of the documentation. That's a good question, how to deal with the pain of losing someone. Well, now, with what I know, I recognize that all the sadness is on this side. The person who has passed on is having such a good time. We're sad because we don't get to talk with them anymore or hug them or feel their embrace, but they're having an awfully good time and they're at peace. And they don't have the worldly worries and woes and the troubles that we have. And there's an old song in this country, this earth is not our, we're just kind of, this is a base camp. If you're climbing a great big tall mountain, there's a base camp and there's the summit. This is just a base camp. And if we can think of our loved ones are at peace, they are knowing that perfect peace that passeth all understanding. I think that's a comfort to know that those who have gone on are waiting for us and that they're at peace. So many people, life can be very hard. And I think after a hard life, I think we get to go home and just rest and be happy and have joy. And that was one thing when I was still floating away from my body in this perfect blackness. I remember very distinctly feeling the presence of these spiritual beings that kind of came toward me and said, welcome home. There you are. You've been away for a bit. We're so glad to see you. They were so happy to see me. And the thing is, they didn't say, boy, you really screwed that up. You could have done so much better in so many ways. Their words or feelings, I guess, the impression I got was they all said, uh, "You did a good job. You did good. And now you're home. It's so good you're home." They were so happy to see me and so happy with me, the law of attraction. I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I think it has some merit. I think we have to watch our thoughts. We have to be thinking, if we're thinking sad thoughts all the time, that's misery. If we're thinking happy thoughts all the time, we're not paying attention to life. I think we have to find a balance. It's impossible to think happy thoughts all the time, and it's misery to think sad thoughts all the time. But part of the problem with the law of attraction is I believed in it before my husband's death. I had written out so many goals and I had written out so many dreams I had. And I never said anything about my husband killing himself. I really believe that sometimes in life, things just happen and we have to figure out how to deal with them. And I think we have to be careful in saying, well, she was thinking something. I mean, look at her. Her child passed on. She must have been thinking some pretty negative thoughts. I think it's dangerous. I think it's victim blaming. So I think, I do think we have to be careful what we think about all the time. But I also think we have to be wise and realize that sometimes these hard things happen, and our job is just to find the spiritual strength to grow through them. I believe that prayer is a powerful resource, and I believe that the next great frontier in medicine will be spiritual healing. I think we have a lot more power than we realize. And again, going back, we were talking about thoughts. I think when you talk about disease all the time, I think it's inevitable that you bring more of it into your life. People tend to get really tangled up in thinking they are their disease. I think that's a really bad mistake. And what do we say? We say, I have this disease. We don't say I have a disease, and we say I all the time. And I think we just need to be really careful and recognize that disease process does not define us. I really think the next great advancement in healing will be understanding the power of prayer and meditation. Well, I guess the big question is, what is the goal of our time on earth? Is it to get more stuff? I mean, we certainly all want to be comfortable. Comfort is good. Comfort is a lovely thing. But isn't the goal spiritual growth? I think it is. And I think the people who have a lot of hard life lessons, like I just met somebody who they had not one but two children who took their own lives, and these were young adults. I think that those are very hard, is the understatement, extremely hard life lessons to get through. Uh, I think when we have hard life lessons, I think there's the potential that we can grow spiritually more and more and more. Goodbye. I hope you all enjoyed it.